A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to HJN Super Graphics, where we're going to explore at least one particular piece of a long-running franchise known as Assassin's Creed. This, of course, is a series that has, in fact, situated upon itself upon various characters and various pieces of a pretty mixed-up timeline. With how complicated it's gotten, I feel like one good way to express the title that I'm about to talk about here, Assassin's Creed Mirage, especially when in anticipation of the upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows, which has been pushed back a few times, but thankfully we got March 2025 that has been confirmed to be the overall release date for this new title. As a Mirage though, Mirage supposedly takes place in the year 861 AD in Iraq. A town known as Baghdad basically sets us upon somewhere between the 9th and 10th century AD. And in terms of the timeline's other entries, like Odyssey, Origins, both of those take place way back into the BC era of history itself. And as for some of the others, well, you might be familiar with the main character of Mirage known as Basin, but he actually makes an appearance in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which came out 3 years prior in 2020. Mirage, of course, was released 3 years afterward in 2023, but it does in fact take us some time before the events of Valhalla, which, the way I see it, is a bit ironic. As where Shadows is gonna go, we don't quite know that much for sure. But if some of you guys are trying to figure out exactly where Mirage goes on the timeline, I feel like that's just one good way to explain it. With Odyssey and Origins happening long before Mirage, and Mirage taking place a little while before Valhalla, that seems fair enough, given the timeline that's currently set upon. But as of where Assassin's Creed Mirage can be explained on, from my own personal experiences, here's what I can at least describe. Getting to play as a character set in the country of Iraq, a place where not many good things are spoken of, especially by a majority of people from the likes of North America and otherwise, I get the feeling that exploring this particular type of culture does at least help us to ground our own personal interests into the likes of the people, events, and usual conflicts that happen within the Middle East. Because let's not forget, this was the 9th century AD compared to the 21st century AD, a mere 1200 years after that point. And while Mirage does give us a first-hand look at what it was like way back in the olden days, it's still a bit heavily derived, knowing today's time does happen to be a bit different, yet most of the cultural significances, values, and plenty of other parts of the backgrounds relating to the Middle East still do remain the same. And while there is change, it unfortunately doesn't cover everything that has happened or probably will ever happen at all. In any case though, Assassin's Creed Mirage, I will say, given my own experience with the game itself, and regardless of what timeline it appears in, what kind of controversies it could spark up, and whatever kind of other unnecessary BS shows up here, the main point of me bringing it up in general is because I played the game twice. It really goes to show. I know how my money works, and I know how to spend it well. Regardless of all that though, getting to play as the main character in the game, Basim, while he is described as a seasoned combat expert, given years of training that had happened sometime after the events of where his home unfortunately became victimized with an invasion. Yeah. And it supposedly was the result of him successfully stealing a certain artifact. And when the guards found out about the whole thing, his town was practically thrown into chaos. And while he basically made it out with his life, he unfortunately didn't quite see much of his friends or family ever again after that point. But years would pass until he would become fully grown and essentially make him a part of the Assassins. Yeah, the Assassins just happens to be the uniform term regarding a certain group or cult centered upon specialized combat tactics, intense knowledge, and plenty of other information that is kept far behind the likes of the general public or even the government. Yeah, in these games, the Assassin's Creed series is well known for establishing our main character in a supposed grouping that is often led by a higher member whom is more than enough to take down entire governments worth of people, practically overthrow most authoritarian levels of civilization. So, as crazy as the whole idea sounds, the fact that it's successful enough to have generated dozens of titles, especially since the mid to late 2000s during the PS3 and Xbox 360 era, when Assassin's Creed was first taking place, it's just incredible how far we've come along since then. In any case though, Basim does eventually catch notes about Baghdad itself and does suspect that there is some sort of conspiracy taking place. Higher-ups, who may have been responsible for the invasion that happened back in his home, were apparently gathering some of their best personnel along the entire map of Baghdad itself. And it's up to Basim, essentially, to hunt them all down and reclaim his honor. And likely, establish a fresh new time for the people to live in. Having played the game myself for at least several hours, even including it as part of GWK Journey 5.067, I can pretty much confirm that a number of things are well enough to be described. Some of the pros that I can identify with are the stealth elements, for one thing, as these games do encourage you to do lots of stealthy action. When it comes to takedown, yeah, it's a lot of the same old stuff. If you remember some other franchises out there, whistling, breaking items to distract others, and then eventually following it up with a sneak up from behind a bush, or other such cover that can usually be of great advantage, like tall grass. Yeah, there's plenty of elements in the Assassin's Creed games that has carried over to other franchises, and while stealth is still a pretty thrilling experience to most players, even myself, I find out that this particular installment in the franchise, Mirage and its stealth elements, they don't exactly hold up as reliable. Because let's not forget, this is the Middle East. This is a place in the world where you don't exactly get that much grass or trees to work with. And when you think about it, there are still a good amount of elements out there that you can take advantage of in order to plant yourself some cover or even to remain hidden for a good amount of time. It still is a bit disappointing to note the fact that the stealth element in here, you can't exactly use trees, grass, bushes to your advantage here. Populated areas in Baghdad are rather common, and there's a good amount of land that you can also explore, but most of which doesn't exactly contain a good amount of grass and whatnot. And even if it does, it's not really enough to give you a decent amount of cover. Though I will say, one other pro in this instance, apart from how the thrill of the stealth element is still there in spite of the problems at hand that I've encountered during my playthrough, would probably have to be the treasure collecting. Yeah, it does seem that treasure collecting, especially if you're looking to get yourself some good weapons, armor, and items, you can always get a hold of that sort of thing. And there's even a good amount of quests that you can go through in order to obtain such items that have said benefits or properties in them. One other pro is the combat. The combat seems to be one of the biggest things about the Assassin's Creed series. Mirage, of course, is no exception to all this. It does in fact have a variety of different moves, maneuvers, and control functions that will allow for you to experience quite a thrill in hand-to-hand combat. Even when getting surrounded by a lot of foes, you can always expect them to have a weakness. Yeah. And I'd say probably one of the biggest challenge points in this whole title would have to be when you're using blades. Yeah, the usage of blades by both Basim and the enemies that he encounters seems to be one of the most common methods of hand-to-hand combat. You don't exactly get anything unarmed. And the slashing, oh man, it's actually rather satisfying. And especially when you get that last hit, execution moves are indeed pretty impressive. Quite a way to lift up the gore even. Yeah, with the Assassin's Creed series, they practically go in almost like Mortal Kombat. Pretty much. Though it does seem to provoke a certain series of familiarity that I recalled talking about years ago. Ghost of Tsushima. Yeah. This was one of Sony's best franchises. And albeit because we're about to get another game called Ghost of Yotei, I'm sure that the success from the last game is going to allow for Yotei to become just as good, if not better. But Mirage, of course, does at least spark up the familiarity factor in the sense that execution moves, combat with swords, and even various maneuvers, functionality, especially that comes to dodging and strafing alongside the enemies in order to get a good advantage on them or get an additional hit, does feel very similar to Ghost of Tsushima. Although the control schemes are different between these games, we do get a similar look and even feel for it. And yes, the challenge of Ghost of Tsushima, in which that if you don't do it correctly, you'll definitely risk getting hit, stunned, or even killed. With Mirage, there's certainly not one hint of an exception either. I guess that pretty much just covers the whole basis on that whole thing. I will discuss a few things about the missions though really quickly. We do in fact start with a few high priority targets, that of which are labeled as individual quests. And there are a certain amount of other characters that you get to interact with and work with in order to establish an understanding. There's some trust that you can build with the other characters. There are some quests you can do for them. There's items you can earn in particular, some of which can also in fact be traded in for the likes of the merchants or even used to craft weapons, saddles for your horse or camel depending on which ride you go for. And then of course, who could forget to have all the items of which that you need, whether they're for healing or they're for powering yourself up. There's also a good amount of items that can in fact offer different upgrading abilities and even skill points. Yes, with RPG games, that's a common thing. Skill points are used as a means to upgrade, learn new skills, and make your character stronger, agile, and smarter than ever before. So, a lot of the same old stuff every which way. And in terms of the quests themselves, I find that exploring certain locations, infiltrating forts, and heavily guarded castles in a way, basically where a good majority of the high profile targets are located, and then of course the epic satisfying moments, including cutscenes, where these guys are defeated by Basim and company. So it does come as no surprise that Assassin's Creed Mirage has some ups, but then of course there are the downs. Like I've said, the combat is rather challenging, and being that I played on a slightly higher difficulty than when I played Ghost of Tsushima, it did in fact give plenty of times where I ended up dying. Yeah, lots of times. Though at least I will say that in the loading process, where it allows you to respawn, you do get to free roam in a way, and it even does offer a lot of tips, information about the game and about the location itself, including the fact that, wouldn't you know, the 2nd century is how far back Baghdad went. Meanwhile, it takes place in the year 861 AD, so that would be around 700 years. That's incredible. But you know what though? With all that said and all that spoken of thus far, Basim and his unique adventure long before the days of Valhalla does at least spark up a good score that might as well be mentioned here. And while some people might have their doubts about the series itself and how well the newer Assassin's Creed games have turned out, let's just say the Middle East, while it might not be the greatest idea out there in returns to where exactly we could be set upon, let's not forget, I've talked about Atomic Heart. What kind of controversy needs to be derived from that game? Well, maybe the fact that it's ex-Soviet Union stuff. And Assassin's Creed Mirage having Middle Eastern correlation to it, of course, there's a bit of drama involved in that whole thing. And I certainly won't lie that the fact is, I've quit social media because I don't need people hustling me about on this stuff, bustling me about this stuff, or whatever it may be. If I played the game, then I've played the game. And I'm willing to give my own review on this no matter what. So, I feel like that is well spoken of. And as for Assassin's Creed Mirage itself, with all the stuff that I've put in so far, and all the playthroughs that I have situated in order to make this video possible, I will say that the exploration of a certain point in the Middle East during a certain time when it was rather common for these sorts of issues to take place, and even hearkening back all the way to modern day, all the way forward, a mere 1,200 years later, when these sort of things still happen to be of common placement. It really goes to show that the history of the Middle East didn't seem much better back then than it could be today. Even with all the valiant effort we seem to put up, it practically feels like it's a normal thing. For them, for anybody. I just don't know how to piece it all together, really. 1,200 years of innovation and such. But for the game itself, though, I'm willing to give it my scoring on this. Probably not a great stance here, but 7.1 out of 10.1. I don't exactly see this as masterpiece material because a lot of the same things are in there, and I don't quite feel as captivated by such things about this title compared to others that I've talked about so far. But being Assassin's Creed, of course there's not going to be anything perfect about these games. And with the upcoming Shadows, we probably can't expect much about that either. But still, I would more than recommend this game to anybody who's looking to really broaden their cultural perspective on things and to get a good kick out of what history has taught us based on the Middle East in the 9th century AD. And knowing how much older the Middle East is compared to most other locations around the world. And so, if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side.